All right, in this video, I've loaded the hand histories where I had a river probe opportunity. And what I filter for here is the situations where I checked that river probe opportunity. And I noticed that while my check raise frequency was good, my check folding frequency was too high. So I've already gone through and sorted the hands here. There's a bunch of hands where it just checks through, so we don't need to look at those. On the top, there's the check raising hands, because I've sorted here by the action, river action in this column. It's actually kind of nice to see that all 7 of my river check raises got through. And I think like 4 of them were bluffs, 3 of them. Yeah, it looks like 3 of them were bluffs. So that's always nice to see. But the focus of this one is to figure out if there's anything wrong with my checking strategy, if I'm check folding too much, or perhaps if I'm not checking with the right distribution of hands. So I'm going to select the group of hands where I check folded. I'm going to replay these, and I'm going to see if we can learn anything about my strategy here. So here, this is going to be, yeah, I think too strong of a hand to bluff, and facing overbet sizing, too weak of a hand to call. Pretty okay with that one. Basically just going through to tag anything that looks unusual on the surface. I think this could be a calling hand on the river. And actually what I'll do is I'll just mark hands as we go through. I know we folded all these, so I can pretty quickly go through and review all the ones, or take note of all the ones that seem close. This one, probably not. I probably bluff with a 10 on the river. So the bottom of my checking range is going to be like a jack and a queen. And some of those have diamonds. Some of those make a straight. Not too concerned about this one. I think this is just a flop fold, if I'm not mistaken, against half pot sizing. But definitely on this run out, I should be checking. Yeah, I'm going to stick to the focus of this grouping so far. It's a little weird, I think, that I called flop for half pot. But I'm okay with letting that one go for now. So here, facing 2x pot, I feel pretty confident that there's nothing wrong with this hand. And again, I don't think I'm supposed to bluff river. If anything, that's part of the question here. It's not just am I clicking the call button enough, right? It's also, what does my checking range look like in the first place? Here, I actually am going to mark that one just because I'm not sure if that hand's supposed to bluff the river. So if I'm checking a little bit too weak, then it could indicate a pattern in why I'm missing some river calls. I'm okay with that fold. Here again, I suspect, see, now I'm concerned that I'm just overcalling half pot sizings. I suspect this is, oh, actually, I think this is a river bluff too. I'm going to mark this one. And here, this hand looks familiar. I think we reviewed it for some reason earlier in this course, or maybe later, depending on in what order you're watching this. But this seems like a fine fold. 2/3 pot on a paired board, kind of interesting. Again, see, this one's hard to adapt to because he bet 2/3 pot on the flop. So of course, if it's not obvious, what that changes is that we need to consider bluffing with stronger hands on the river than we normally would if he had bet quarter. If he had bet quarter on the flop, there's no way this hand bluffs. I would have every king high. I would have like, I don't know, jack 8 with a heart. I have like jack 10 of any suit. But against 2/3, maybe this hand actually qualifies as a river bluff. Either way, that's, I think, a little bit outside the scope. Yeah, again, I'm making a pretty light float. And also just potentially a river check raise or like a river something. Yeah, so here when everything misses around the king and the 10, I think it's pretty clear we're not supposed to bluff the ace. And yeah, I mean, I just can't, with the 8 of spades in our hand as well, I just can't imagine needing to call that hand on the river. Pot on the flop, check, check on the turn. So against pot, we're going to fold some 10s on the flop. Going to fold maybe even a bad jack. I'm not sure. We're going to have a lot of kings in our range, a lot of 8s in our range. We're definitely bluffing river with a bear 9. Yeah, we're definitely bluffing river with a bear 9. So this hand is pretty low in our checking range, although I'm slightly curious to see how that one is supposed to play on the end. This looks like a river bluff to me. I'll review it, but I think that's just a river bluff. And this, I'm not sure about flop with no backdoor flush draw. Everything's looking, I haven't played a lot of heads up since the Legend Showdown, so everything I'm doing looks so loose. Like maybe it was fine. I don't think my fold to flop c-bet was super low. But everything looks so loose because of, so again, tons of misdraws, no reason to bluff ace high on the river, no reason to check call it, I think. I mean, maybe we're supposed to call river sometimes. It's not a crazy idea. Yeah, it's not crazy to call river sometimes. I mean, diamonds do miss, but a lot of stuff gets there. This is kind of a repeat scenario. So I'm not going to continue to review all these hands where I'm potentially missing a river bluff, but I'm starting to get the impression that my checking range is a little bit too weak because I'm under bluffing the probe. But that at the same time, my river probe frequency was good. Actually quite surprised I folded this hand. It's a pretty good looking bluff catcher. Yeah, I'm surprised I didn't do something with this hand. But I guess I was right. Small bet in position. And he got me to fold. That's a painful one. Small bet in position. Not sure why I folded. I just don't like to fold. I don't think I need to review how to play against this sizing. I just don't really like to fold. 4 flush run out. That's a unique one. I'm interested in seeing the output for that. But yeah, it's definitely looking like another small bet in position. I'm more okay with this fold. Just having 2 4s, it's much worse removal. And I'm gonna bluff some ace high on this run out, I hope. But this is the pattern I'm starting to notice as I look through these hands, is that I'm arriving at river with a number of hands that could have bluffed. Like hands like this, where I just face a huge bet and I decide not to call. I'm less concerned about that because I think I have a good sense for where the line is. But what I'm unsure about is whether the original, again, I'm very surprised I folded this. Just based on the hand, this is something that's supposed to do something. I don't know how else to describe it. When you like river the pair and they reopen the action, it's a pretty strong hand. And then I have an ace as a side card, so I don't interfere with anything. But these are the kinds of spots I'm not so interested in reviewing right now. I'm more just interested in figuring out the potential flaw that I found where I am under bluffing. This could just be a flop fold. I mean, I don't think in heads up it's supposed to be a flop fold. I just like if I'm folding this river because I'm so concerned that he's value heavy on the flop, then like maybe I should just fold the flop. I think this is the type of strategic adjustment I've become more comfortable with in recent months. Is if I get like a sizing indication that my opponent is overdoing it for value, then Like, why put in the 375 on the flop and fold river with such a good hand when I could just fold flop? But in hindsight, I mean, I don't know what was happening at that point in the match or why I folded. I'm sure I had a reason, but looking at this hand objectively, I think I should just call the river. Probably. Yeah, I mean, I must have had something on these annoying bets, and of course, like, yeah, I see a hand like this, and I really don't want to pay it off, and I'm happy, I suppose, that I didn't pay it off. But this is just a really good bluff catcher. It's also a really viable check raising hand. And if I'm wrong once, which I was with the 8-5, if I'm wrong once, then all these folds are not good. Like, if I just call all of them and I get the one right, then I win more money than if I fold all of them and I get the one wrong. So I should be viewing it in this way. So here again, I think just an opportunity to bluff lead the river. And instead I'm checking, potentially thinking about check raising and then deciding not to check raise. So I'm not happy about that. I think I have found perhaps the source of this high folding frequency is a willingness to make river folds that are probably reasonable, but at the same time, an unwillingness to bluff aggressively before I check. So let's take a look. Now that I've marked a chunk of hands, I can filter just for those. I think there was one in here that was marked previously for a different reason that I will unmark. And this set of hands here, we're going to take a look at a few sims. So I'm going through these hands in order, and the first one I'm looking at is this ace deuce. So the first question is, did we make a good call on the flop? Because it looks a little bit light to me in hindsight. And the next question is, first of all, I'm pretty sure we don't bluff hands like this on the river, but of course we'll get to see as we review. But I'm also wondering what type of check calling hands we're supposed to have in this spot, because I would be block betting a lot of jacks, maybe even, probably not a 4. But are we only check calling with 4x and jack x? That seems a little bit wrong to me. Probably also random turn to rivered pairs. But do we have ace high in this type of situation? Because I am avoiding the bluff, knowing that we have so many missed draws here. But what does that do to our check calling range? Does that shift it down all the way to ace high? Okay, so I do have a pretty similar board here. I am lacking the wheel draw on the flop, but against a small c-bet on this texture, we are considering, like, it's a break-even-ish call with the low aces, and it's definitely a call with the higher aces. So that makes me think that my call on king jack 4 with ace deuce was totally fine. Getting the same price, but having slightly more equity because we have the backdoor wheel draw makes me think that it's just supposed to call. So that answers the first part of the question. And then I'm just going to change the run out. I gave the same double flush draw turn card and then the equivalent run out on the river. So now looking at what we start by bluffing, we are not bluffing any ace highs. So this much I got correct. Actually, the bluffing threshold for us seems to be somewhere in the queen high range. So even queen 10 and queen 9 are not bluffing the river. Although when we get down to like queen 7 or queen 5, we're starting to see bluffs. So that's good to know. This has a lot to do with the flop sizing, right? So when we face the small flop sizing, we float flop with hands like queen of spades 8. So recognizing that we have such weak hands in our range, as well as, of course, just 10-9 or spades, like low spades that missed, then it becomes clear why we don't bluff ace high. So when that's the case, we check and we face, I think the actual sizing was 3/4. I'll see if it's necessary to look into that. So if it was half pot, we do quite a lot of ace high calling. Actually, ace deuce and ace deuce specifically is doing quite a lot of calling. And very often we do see this pattern where the deuce is a good bluff catching card because I believe the imposition player just folds a lot of deuces pre-flop. So since they fold so many deuces pre, and then like ace deuce is too strong to bluff, they just show it down. So there's not a lot of bluffing hands that are able to have the deuce in it, which means that a lot of the bluffing hands instead will have, let's say like 10-7, 9-7, 9-5, right? So like 2 medium cards in it. If they were to bet pot, we still call ace deuce. So pretty clear indication that I should have considered calling this hand. It's the only ace high it appears that's pure calling, and even ace five is just only occasionally thinking about calling. But this is versus pot, and I was facing 3/4 pot in game. But it's funny because at the same time we're folding a lot of 10-6, 9-6, 8-6. But I think I would have recognized this in game. This would be the equivalent of 9-4 suited or whatever. Although you can see that pattern that I was alluding to in a different hand, we'll see in some other sims. But a lot of these rivered pairs, so rivering the pair in this line is a really valuable bluffing hand. I think it was an ace-8 against flushy that I check folded. I was really surprised to see myself check fold. So you can see here why that's the case. We just block a lot of the rivered strong hands, so we do a lot of check raising with those combos. Anyway, good to note that ace high is considering a call even for pot here. So clearly I was off in my assessment of what needed to be called. Next hand we wanted to look at is the 6-3 of hearts. Again, the first assessment is, were we calling too light on the flop? But then when we turn the pair here, is this a hand that wants to consider calling? Based on what I just saw in the previous sim, my estimate is no, we don't need to do much calling with this hand on the river. But let's see what the solution says. So just a very quick assessment, jumping straight to the river with the same sizing line from the previous hand, we would be pure folding this type of hand on the river. But I do want to go back to the flop just to see how close that flop call was in the first place. So facing 3/4, it's clearly a fold, and only the very best backdoor flush draw and straight draws are thinking about check raising the flop, but they're not floating. And against the quarter pot, it was already close to a raise, but is it close to a fold? It's not really. Calling is pretty significantly better than folding against quarter pot. So to get to the bottom of that half pot, I would have to run a separate sim. I'm not going to go through that now, but I just wanted to check roughly how close this hand was on the flop. It does look like it was worth consideration, but that river play, pretty clearly unnecessary, not the type of hand we need to be calling. I can go back and look just at what type of hands are more pertinent. If we're facing a half pot bet, we are thinking about bluff catching the river with high cards. There's some ace high hands that are calling, even queen high hands that are thinking about calling. Again, we're just looking for removal on where our opponent's likely to draw bluffs from. And in this situation, our opponent is likely to draw bluffs from any two low cards. I think if we were to look at the range explorer, so very often in position on the river, the checking range is just going to start from the lowest equity hands and go up from there. So you can see like a very low frequency of giving up with these hands that are zero equity. I've just isolated the checking range here. Very low frequency of giving up these zero equity hands. And then once we get up into like the 5 to 10% equity category, we start to see hands way more likely to check. And the ace high hands are extremely likely to check because they have quite a bit of equity. You could also just see this looking at the equity in position here. If I click on the betting range, you can see that the in position, the visual here is less than ideal. I actually just prefer the view in Range Explorer. If I click on the B50 or like the half pot range here, you can see a lot of the airball hands starting to emerge at really high frequencies. And they seem to just go almost up to weak queen high, but predominantly 9 high and worse. There's a 10 and a jack on board. So this is pretty much just any two undercards to the 10 that didn't make a pair. These are very, very often bluffing in position. So you can kind of tell in these situations what cards you're looking to avoid. You're looking to avoid two cards below the 10 with your calling range. So if you have queen 8, ace 8, ace 9, you've got a pretty good bluff catcher. If you just have two cards that don't interfere with those bluffs and you're ahead of those bluffs, then it's valid. So if this looks bizarre to you to see that, queen 8 is check calling the river, hopefully that helps clear it up a little bit. It also clears up why pocket 3s, 4s, and 5s are check folding always, why 6-4 and 6-3 are check folding always, 9-6, check folding always, pair of deuces with a low card. These are just not good bluff catchers. You want the high cards. So looking at this king deuce hand, I think the check call on the flop is totally fine with the 3-card backdoor. This is the first instance of us looking at why I didn't bluff the river. So I am fairly convinced that this is going to bluff the river, but let's see if my intuition is accurate here. So I found a corollary board texture here. I didn't have Queen Jack Jack in my subset, but I had Jack 10 10. So you just need to think about slightly lower ranks as the equivalent hand in this case. It's starting to appear that it's very clear that I'm supposed to bluff because you can see on this board the queen highs are never giving up. And when you go into king highs, even on this board, where king high is second high card instead of first high card, even king 7, king 3, king deuce are mixing in bluffs, although king 5, king 6 are not. So there's, like pretty much no doubt in my mind that I'm missing a bit of bluff frequency here. And you can see that there's just a lot of both big betting and small betting happening. So I do have options with how big to bet in this situation. If, again, we were to check and face I think it was pot bet in this hand, we still need to be thinking about defending a good number of high cards. So I am inclined, the pattern is emerging pretty clearly in my mind, that in this spot, what I need to work on is not only bluffing a little bit more aggressively from out of position, but also being a lot more willing to check call high cards in this line after a small flop bet for sure. So in this hand, there were a couple of interesting things. First, Make Boy Thin bets full pot on the flop. So that's going to tighten our continuing range significantly. But then it comes 4 to a straight, paired, and now we're facing a 2/3 pot bet on the river. So my intuition is that having a low side card is bad, and also that I fold so much on the flop that this hand isn't worth all that much in this situation. But let's see. So first, looking at the flop strategy against a big bet, this is 3/4 pot. And for comparison, 3/4 pot is getting us to fold some of our king X, which is actually quite surprising to me. Certainly a lot of ace highs, unless that ace high also has a double gutter. And as I thought, weaker Jack X and 10X are doing a lot of folding on the flop. So the majority of our defending range connects around the straight draw. We're seeing 9X with a backdoor flush draw, King X, some Ace X with a double gutter, and good pairs. But Queen X does not fold the flop. And in this case, there was a flop flush draw, although I am missing it on this particular texture. And when the board pairs on the river, first question is what types of hands are bluff leading. Not surprising to see that 9X is pure bluffing the river, even though it's only a block bet. The majority of the time, this hand is pretty low in the range. Also, like the ace highs with backdoor nut flush draw are bluffing the river. But even ace 9 is just a pure bluff. And going up into the category of like Jack X, we're also seeing a good number of bluffs from Jack X. So I think my intuition was pretty good in the sense that Queen X is very often, it's very close to the top of the checking range, and a lot of like trips are checking the river, and a reasonable number of straights, although not too many straights, are checking the river. So I think in game we faced 2/3 pot on the river, but for reference, if we face half pot, we just randomize folds with a whole bunch of Jack X and Queen X, which is pretty common to see that in this spot where we're forced to defend some of the time, but not all of the time. And we don't want to make it obvious to our opponent which cards to bluff. We don't want, 6-5 to be a better bluff than 7-4 or whatever. But practically speaking, I think just avoiding the lowest cards in the deck is good. If it was a pot size bet, we're still forced to defend some percentage of these hands, but much lower percentage. It does seem there's a preferential suit of queen for whatever reason. It's kind of interesting. I guess having blocker to Queen X of diamonds might influence the frequency of our opponent having a straight. But I'm not going to research that for now. The point was that my intuition in this spot was pretty good, so no need to adjust here. Here we had King 9 suited against Fedor. Again, slightly loose feeling flop call, although I'm starting to get the impression that my flop plays have just been fine, and the time spent away from heads up has changed my perception of how loose I'm supposed to call on the flop. And we're looking to see if this qualifies as a river bluff. So I set this up. I haven't actually looked at the flop strategy yet, but I set this up for having called the flop 75% sizing, and my hand strength is still here at the river. So obviously, I was supposed to call the half pot if my hand strength is here at all against 3/4 spot. Although it does seem with hearts, I'm here at a lower frequency than with backdoor flush draw, of course. And king 8 of hearts did not qualify, so that's good to know. But those high cards that wrap around the jack, I guess, are just pretty damn strong. Even king 10 offsuit is here basically always. So the bluffing frequency or the bluffing threshold seems to be somewhere lower than what I imagined. We could test this by looking at the Range Explorer. The threshold for our overbet seems to be what they're categorizing as nothing, which is less than king high. And the threshold for the block bet is also nothing, which is less than king high. So king high is never bluffing this run out. We're seeing queen high actually has somehow 20, did I see that right? 25% equity with queen high. And king high has 33% equity. So certainly no reason to bluff this situation. I think our check was very reasonable. And then once again, I'm curious what our check calling range kind of stops at. The half pot sizing would lead us to calling a pretty good chunk of ace and king high, and the full pot sizing would clear out the majority of our unpaired hands. So now looking back at this hand with king 9, I'm quite convinced that my intuition for what hands are supposed to bluff was just pretty far off. I don't think I'm even going to look at this one now. Flop was certainly a call. River was certainly a check. And facing 2x pot, I mean, rule of thumb is big bet means big hand, and we do a lot of folding, so I'm quite okay with this one. The ace deuce here, obviously calling. So this one was just a question of whether this hand class is supposed to be check calling the river. Again, I have a feeling it's not bad, but what's different here is that a lot of stuff improved for us. So the 8 improves our range, the king improves our range. That's going to shift our whole checking range up. So we have seen a lot of bottom pairs folding in previous sims, but usually with kickers that block the bluffs. So let's see with this one. So here we faced a small bet on Jack 7 deuce. I just thought it was noteworthy that probably this is one of the sources of my low check raise frequency on flops. I think I pointed that out in an early video when we were looking at flop play, but ace deuce, even without a backdoor flush draw, is supposed to be raising this flop a good chunk of the time. And for sure, I was not getting a 15% check raise frequency on this flop. So good reminder to me as I'm clicking through this that there was an opportunity there for me to play this hand more aggressively. Now the river was an unsuited king. And here I'm sure that ace deuce starts with a check. If we're curious about where the bluffing starts, this run out was good enough for us that ace high is thinking about bluffing a fraction of the time, although certainly not much of it. You can see that most of the bluffing is coming from queen high and lower. And the in-position player is using a mix of full pot and half pot. Against full pot, ace deuce, it's never folding. So I think, again, we've got a pretty good indication that this is just the type of hand that wants to call. Again, you can see, low pocket pairs folding, 7x with a low card folding, but just having an ace along with a pair or an ace along with a high card is very consistently a good bluff catcher in this line. So funny enough, I expected to go into this review finding that my out of position range was totally out of whack and that I was checking too strong. And what I actually found was that I'm just folding high cards and low pairs too frequently. So really good reminder that it's necessary to dig into your assumptions, and that going through it in a systematic way can reveal some personal biases or some misconceptions that might be forming. So hopefully you saw that by going through it in this deliberate way, I actually corrected a mistake that I didn't realize that I previously had.